And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday, July 8th, 2017 edition of Auto Talk. I am your host, Ed Welsh, and for the rest of this hour, we'll be discussing matters that are of pertinence to you and your automobile. As always, we hope to impart to you some useful automotive information and perhaps provoke some automotive conversation on this rainy Saturday morning in the Mohawk Valley as the monsoon season continues here at the Mohawk Valley. We've had a pretty rough week with water, and it's not been fun for a lot of people. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about avoiding buying a flooded car. We'll talk about that next week, but I wanted to have some more time to prepare. But we've got lots of other stuff for this week that we're going to talk about. In a few minutes, we're going to talk with Kevin Hanna, the Director of External Affairs for AT&T. We've got an interesting event coming on Tuesday that I think you'll want to hear about. But first, our car care tip of the week has got to do with making 4 repairs before it's too late. You know, there's a lot of things you can put off when it comes to fixing your car. Let's face it, we want to go to the repair shop, most of us, about as much as we want to go to the dentist. And of course, like the dentist, some folks will go through great lengths to avoid a trip to the shop. But if you skip or delay some important repairs, you expose your vehicle to some dangerous situations and maybe even much costlier fixes down the road. So there's 4 things that I would say right now kind of repairs, things that should be fixed as soon as possible. And we put it in 4 categories. First, it's leaky fluids. Now, we talk about leaky fluids, again, something that's just a small little drip once in a while. It should be looked at, but that's not an emergency. What is an emergency is if things run low for too long. For example, an engine without oil or coolant could have irreparable damage in a matter of seconds. Yet some people prefer to add oil or coolant every day instead of fixing it. And what happens if you forget to add it? Well, the leak generally will only get worse over time, and it will be hard to keep up with the refills. And if you ignore a leak too long, well, and very well could be a simple repair, you end up destroying your engine. So obviously that's not something you want to have happen. When a leak gets past, when you have to start adding stuff all the time, that's when you need to go have it looked at. You know, like I said, things seep, you get occasional drip here and there. You want to look at tightening a clamp, something of that nature. But if you're adding coolant to your vehicle all the time and it's leaking out of the car, or you're adding oil all the time and it's leaking out of the car, I think what you want to do is go get that fixed. Now, the second thing that becomes an issue over time is grinding brakes. Now, brake pads, especially the front ones, have little devices on them, a little piece of metal. And when the brake wears to a certain point, when the pad gets to a certain point, that little tab basically hits the rotor, makes that terrible squealing noise that we hear when brakes start to get worn out. That little piece of metal is designed to alert you that you need brake pads. So I know many times I hear cars just driving by. I can hear that noise, and I'm saying, "Geez, that car needs brakes." I hope the owner's paying attention, because like anything else, you get desensitized to noises. You know, it's kind of like living next to the airport. You don't hear the planes after a while. Well, after a while, that little piece of metal will wear out. But once it wears out, the brake pads are gone. Then you start the grinding noise, which is metal on metal. And of course, when that occurs, you could end up damaging your calipers by them pushing things out too far. But also, you can eat your rotors for lunch. And guess what? Neither of those are very cheap to replace. Best thing to do is if you hear that little squealy noise, you want to have your brakes inspected and have the pads changed. Again, it's a lot cheaper to do that on the front end than on the back end after it starts grinding for a while. That grinding is just not going to work out so well. You know, another thing that people ignore or don't get fixed right away are leaky tires. People tend to have a leak, and sometimes it leaks so slow that you're adding air every couple of days. I will tell you that if you're adding air once a month, a pound or 2 or 3, that's okay. That's why you check your tires. Just the normal expansion and contraction of the tire, you can lose some air. But if you're putting air in it every other day, you got a problem with that tire. It needs to be addressed. And if you do it for too long and the tire runs too low, you can permanently damage the inside of the tire. Not to mention, you can accelerate the wear of the tire. Once you get 25% below the recommended pressure, you will start wearing the tire out a lot faster. Once you get below that, you can start damaging the tire. So let's just say you've messed around with it, and you keep running it low and putting some air in it, or just keep putting Fix-A-Flat in it, which is great for emergencies, but I really dislike that stuff because it really makes a mess inside the tire. But again, get you home in emergency, yeah, it's okay. But the bottom line is, if you weaken the sidewall of the tire because you haven't had enough tire pressure in it, then all of a sudden you take it out on a nice hot day and you're running at highway speed. Well, if the sidewall has been damaged at all, you can cause yourself a blowout. And at highway speed, those do not usually end well. And you could end up putting yourself in a pretty bad spot if it just blows out unexpectedly. So when you get a small leak, once you're at the point where you're adding air, a couple times a week, you've got to go get it fixed. And again, it's inconvenient. We know that. But it'd be more inconvenient to get a blowout out on a thruway someplace on a hot July day. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is windshields. Many times we get a little chip in the windshield. Those can be repaired. Those little spider cracks. There's great technology to repair windshields. But people tend to ignore that stuff. You say, well, it's just a little chip. Well, you're right. It is just a little chip. But the problem is glass is temperature sensitive. So especially your windshield, because it sits out in the sun. Well, if you got a little half-inch or less than even half-inch little chip in there or a spider crack, that could become much worse on a very hot or very cold day. If the glass contracts too quickly or expands too quickly because of heat, especially this time of the year in the hot sun, all of a sudden that little crack can become an irreparable gash that goes all the way across the windshield. And of course, the safest and most cost-effective solution is to get the crack or chip repaired as soon as possible. But if you wait too long, you might need a complete windshield replacement. And of course, if the crack is large enough, if it grows, you can get yourself in a situation to earn yourself a ticket for faulty equipment. So these are things that again, the four things that I think that you really need to pay attention to, because the bottom line is, if we end up with things that wait too long to get fixed, they end up usually costing more in the long run. And it kind of goes back to what I said, like about a toothache. If you've got a toothache and you just let it go, eventually the dentist is going to tell you something horrible is going to happen to that tooth. So I think when you look at excessive coolant leaks or excessive oil leaks, you've got the brakes squeak for too long, you get a tire that you're putting air in every couple of days, you got a chip in the windshield. These are the four things that you should not ignore for too long. You can put yourself in a bad spot, and again, cost yourself a lot more money, because after all, at the end of the day, when you got to get your car fixed, who's going to pay for it anyways? Well, you are. And last week we talked a bit about affordability of repairs, and again, that's always an issue. But those things that I described are not going to become cheaper to work on over time. They're going to become more expensive. So really, the bottom line to that is pay attention and talk about what with your family members. And again, we talk about the best thing to do is to try to set up a fund, put $25-50 away a month towards car repairs. So one of these things happens, you can get it taken care of sooner rather than later.